and welcome to It's Your Future. I'm Ada Harden, Volunteer Resource Specialist for AISD. It's Your Future is a program for AISD students and others who want to learn more about specific career fields. People from all walks of life will be here to share some of their experiences with you on our program, and we hope that our guests will help you become more aware of what you can do now to plan for the kind of future you want. You know, it's nice to listen to people and how they shape their lives and how they've made it. And listening to these people, we hope will give you a better idea about how to plan your future. We have a very special person with us on our show. He's an architect, and his name is Mr. George Villalava. And welcome to the show.
Nice to be here, Ada.
Thank you so much for coming by, and I hope I got the name right.
That was very good.
Close.
Very good.
Well, listen, tell us about, I understand that you're not a native of Austin, Texas, but you did come here to receive your education at the university. Did you come before going to the university, or was that your first experience here in Austin?
I came directly to the university in 1960. And I came here to study architecture after having 2 years of having studied engineering at Texas Western, which is now called University of Texas at El Paso.
Oh, okay.
I'm originally from El Paso, and my family lives there, my mom and dad.
Are you from a what size family, or?
Medium size. There were 4 of us, 3 boys and 1 girl.
And are they in the same type business, or?
No, I'm the only architect.
You're the only architect.
There's 1 accountant and 1 interior designer and 1 housewife and 1 computer technician.
Oh, how neat. Was there any special person who might have influenced you to go into this particular career?
I guess my mother.
Why is that?
Well, she was very liberal-minded, and she introduced me to the world of books and pressed upon me the importance of reading and writing and command of the language.
Oh, I see.
And then I had natural abilities for drawing. But there have been many people along my development which have been very influential in my career.
I see. So you're saying that you almost have to have some natural abilities to be able to be an architect? Would you say that's true?
Well, I think you have to have a very natural curiosity about the world, not only in its natural state, but also in its physical state, in its environmental state, in its social state. And of course, the ability to visualize through drawing is a very valuable tool for communication. But I think basically you should have a very keen interest in society, in art, music, drama, literature. Everything counts.
I think you must be somewhat creative to be able to do your job. Is that correct?
You need to have a sense of joy in that creative process. I'd say joy because it is a very joyful experience, but it can be a very painful one in that the creative process is always a slow and very methodical one. But there's a lot of satisfaction in it. And sometimes there is some financial reward.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
You say that kind of reluctantly.
Well, some people go into architecture for financial reasons. I prefer to think that a lot of us go into architecture because of passion.
Passion?
Yes.
Oh, why is that? Passion?
Well, because it takes a very specific kind of intensity, and you have to pursue it with a lot of dedication and a lot of desire, a very serious intent. The whole educational process is very long and very difficult. Many people drop along the way. And so I like to put it in terms of passion, because there is that joy that comes from hard work, and your rewards are not always financial, so you have to say, well, I do it out of love and not
because you like
money.
the job.
Exactly.
I think that's really interesting. You say that, but tell me, you said it takes a lot of time for preparations.
It does.
How many years are we talking about, let's say in universities or in colleges? How many years?
If you go the regular route, it would take 5 years for for a degree, for a bachelor's of architecture. Now, some schools have a 4-year degree, an associate degree of architecture, which is 4 years, but it doesn't include the normal courses in design, and so that's not as comparable. Then you have your graduate degrees, which, you know, your master's, and some colleges even offer a PhD in architecture, but it's very rare.
When most people go into this particular career, do they generally go into it with the idea of becoming their own company or having their own firm? Do you know, or do they go into it with the idea of working in a, well, like for the city or state agencies or something of that nature?
I think most students, through the course of their educational development, have a very limited view of what kind of business they're going to pursue. And that's mainly because the architectural curriculum is very very intense towards the sciences and the architectural design courses and the history, and there's so many things that you have to study, and plus nowadays you have to study a lot of business, or business related, a lot more than they did in my era. But I would say that very few students have an idea of how to practice architecture, and that comes afterwards.
Oh, I see.
But basically, it is my opinion that almost every architect would like to think of being their own boss, you know, in time, and eventually be self-employed.
How long have you been in the business?
I've been a principal 12 years.
What's the principal?
I've been, you know, self-employed. I have owner of my own company, and I've been a designer for 20 years.
Oh my goodness! And speaking of designing, I understand that you're doing some schools right here in the district.
Yes,
Tell us about it.
I'm very proud of the school that I'm doing right now. That is just broken ground, as we say. We just started the foundation. It's Northwest Elementary School, which is in North Austin, in the Millwood subdivision area. And I'm very excited because it has some elements that I haven't tried before. My firm does a lot of schools. This particular school has what I would call a commons, and it's more like a mall. It's a wide mall that allows the students to orientate themselves to the rest of the school, so you don't have the endless labyrinth of corridors, you know. And the intention is to give the student a very keen sense of place where he is at any given time, and he can always relate back to this corridor. And so they're very short corridors and a very economical circulation system, plus variation of spaces, and I think it's a very exciting school.
Sounds like it's going to be very exciting. I'm tempted to talk about LBJ because it's so differently designed. I mean, if you don't go by the color scheme, you'll get lost in there. It's not one of these kinds of schools, is it?
Yeah, I had a small part in designing LBJ.
Oh, did you?
When I was a designer.
So then we can hold you for
no, but I'm not
getting lost over there.
I'm not responsible for that part of the design. But there is a common problem, and that sometimes you have a very complex circulation system, and my intent in Northwest Elementary School was to simplify that and keep it very compact, very economical, and give the students a sense of orientation.
That sounds wonderful. When do you think it's going to be finished? Have you started? Have you actually started building?
It'll be finished spring of next year, or early summer of next year.
So in 85?
In 85.
Be ready.
Yes.
Well, that's wonderful. I think that's just great. I really do. And tell me this then, what, after having gone into this career, okay, and have you had any kind of, should I say, any kind of rejections in having gone in this career, or have you ever thought at any time that this is not really what you want to do, or did you ever feel that you wanted to do something else, or?
No, I can truthfully say that from the time that I was 13 years old, I knew what I was going to be.
Okay.
And so from that time on, I've been, right on course. And I've never had any regrets. Sometimes I get frustrated, but I think my career is a very exciting one. It's very rewarding in terms of spiritual gratification, and it's a very unique and very ancient art. I would say it's one of the basic arts of mankind, that of creating a habitat, the elaboration of the cave, so to speak. It involves working with people of all different levels, from very sophisticated clients to workmen in the field that are from a totally different background. It involves not only history and math and science and having a very keen sense of music and drama and literature. Because it basically what the architect intends to do through his buildings is make a social statement as to how that building is going to reflect within its context.
Oh, and does that matter whether or not the type of building it's going to be? I know you mentioned music, for instance. Would your thinking on creating some kind of building have something to do with it, if it's a building that's going to be housing some kind of musical aspect?
Well, yes, that would be understanding music in an acoustical sense.
Oh,
that has a lot to do. Like, I designed Houston Tillotson Chapel Auditorium.
It's beautiful.
And I've been told that chapel has very fine acoustics.
It's beautiful.
Now that's a case in point where a knowledge of acoustical principles, helped the designer. In that case, I was a designer, to resolve some problems that were going to be inherent within that program. But what I meant, understanding music, Ada, I think that music is one of the most sublime expressions, artistic expressions that man has, and through understanding that medium, you can understand what interpretations have been made of the human condition. And understanding that, you can begin to translate that into architectural terms. And so it's very important that you understand how mankind expresses his society through the musical media.
So when you're creating like that, you have to have some sense of what's actually what you're trying to put forth, what you're trying to create, and that takes
within your educational development. Yes.
Oh, okay.
And so in your educational development, you should pursue as many subjects as you can possibly handle, because all that input will eventually come back into your design process.
It's beautiful. About how many buildings do you think at this time you've created?
Good ones or bad ones?
All of them.
It's hard to say, because we've done public housing in which there have been a lot of buildings, but we've done buildings for the University of Texas, for Austinite ASD, for Pan American University, for the federal government, for the city of Austin, for Texas MHMR.
Just a number of them.
It's been very exciting.
Which of the ones would you think would be one of your favorites? Can you visualize that?
I can say that when I think of my buildings, I think about my clients. And some have been better clients and better buildings, and some have been better buildings and better clients. But one building that comes to mind that we did in joint venture with another architectural firm is South Austin Multipurpose Center.
Oh, yes.
That was very interesting because there the community had a large part in the program, and they dictated that we have tile roofs and plaster walls and arches because they wanted a very Spanish motif. But I think in the end run, the building became more Japanese than Spanish. And I think that's part of the joy of architecture, in that they perceive it as one thing, and we as designers perceive it as another. But the end result has been a very pleasant one, has received very good comments from the community and from the users. And so that building has very, very good results, and I'm very, very pleased with that building.
Have you ever had any real true conflicts with people or clients who might have something in mind that you really don't feel that it might be appropriate for this particular building? Have you ever experienced that?
That's part of the joy of designing, and that people always have preconceived notions. People come to an architect and say, I have an idea for a house or I have an idea for a building. I had a client one time insist that I do a building in a certain style, a style that didn't exist, and and I told her that I wasn't that good, that a style did not derive from one person, that a style was a result of not only many people but many generations and in an evolutionary process, and that one person could not make a style. And so I emphasized to her that it was not incumbent on my participation in that process that would result in that it was mostly a design of programming, that it would be a sense of process that would eventually meet all her goals and all her needs and translate her desires into an architectural idiom. And it came out, it became a very interesting result, and that was a building in Crystal City. It was a health clinic in Crystal City. But here you had a client that was very, very anxious, very intensive in her desire to create a building that would reflect their attitudes, which were very, very exciting and very strong. But again, it was an educational process. I told her, I said, we have to be patient about that. That will come within its own time. Let's talk about programming right now.
Have you ever had an experience where you visualized the building after having talked to your client and you visualized what you want, but yet have some difficulties in coming up with it? And if you do you have members of your staff to help you create this idea and make it a reality?
Earlier in the program, I mentioned that there was a joy to architecture and pain involved. Well, that's part of the pain. That's part of the painful process, in that when you start designing, sometimes we have preconceived ideas sometimes. And sometimes the process is intuitive and sometimes it's cognitive. Sometimes it's analytical and sometimes it's something that you pull from somewhere out of your past, or it's an eclectic grasp of something that you've seen before. And I've designed a lot of buildings on napkins.
On napkins?
Yes, when I was somewhere in an airport or in a restaurant, and I would start conceptualizing something, and out of that napkin I would become married to that little sketch, and it would later on translate into something more elaborate.
Would it be because you had something in mind at that time, or a particular job in mind, or it's just something that popped into your mind that you might use later?
You never know. Sometimes it comes and sometimes it doesn't. But then there's been other times where you would process forever and ever and not be satisfied with the result. And that's when you become very, very frustrated, and sometimes you just have to walk away from it and come back to where you become more uninhibited and free and flow with it. And so I don't think there's a formula for that, Ada. And of course, I think different architects design differently because they've been trained differently or they have different abilities. And some architects design in a visual manner in which they conceive an outside, an exterior appearance, and then they design the inside, to reflect the outside. That's not a very logical process because
But it's realistic.
Because you begin to force the issue.
Right.
It's better to take a program, develop your spaces, and then let the outside do whatever it wants, whatever the inside wants to do. Now, sometimes the owner will say, well, I want this to be Spanish Renaissance. And so you know that there's going to be certain detailing and certain elements that are going to be playing within that composition. But the program is the most important thing. I think a good designer will follow his process very, very faithfully. And the intuitive sense will come because of your own natural abilities. And as you mature, your intuitive sense becomes more, hopefully it becomes more perceptive and more sharper in its ability to pierce through this fog that sometimes covers you up.
Do you find that to be something that you might be experiencing now? Do you think that your designs now differ in any manner from those of when you were younger?
Oh, most definitely.
Wonder why is that?
Well, for one thing, as you get more experience, you become more confident and more decisive, and you have a sure hand, and you're able to persuade owners to do. Sometimes you can't always make that premise, but sometimes you have a better sense of control, and you have a better sense of control within your own abilities to mold what you're doing, and it's a very complex process, because you're not only dealing with economics, you're also dealing with materials that have to be put a certain way, methodology, so that the roof doesn't leak and that the air conditioner works. But then ultimately you're dealing with aesthetics. If you have a very sensitive client and you're dealing with aesthetics, the aesthetic manifestation becomes a very subtle and sublime expression of what you're trying to do. And as you get older, as you've had more experience and you've tried more things and you've had your share of failures and successes, you instinctively know that that's going to look right and that's not going to look so good. And I've had things that didn't work. But
you
that's
really have to have an imagination then, don't you? That plays a great part in the designing area.
Yes, you need to have a visualization process. Within your own mind, you need to be able to visualize that sense of process, that sense of, and I keep saying process because that's what it is, Ada. Even in your own visualization, you need to be able to take all these variables and put them together into a whole that's going to not only be economical or be within the budget, but also be tight, be structurally sound. Like Vitruvius said, one of the early architects, a building has to have commodity, a sense of commodity, a sense of structure, and a sense of delight.
That's beautiful. And after the architect has done the, what do you call it, blueprints? Is that what you call them? Okay, and all that, is that the end of his role or her role? Or
no, that would be the end of the, you have three phases basically. You have a design phase in which you do all your conceptualizing and your design work.
Okay.
And then you do your construction drawings phase where you prepare all the legal documents, what you call the blue lines or the working drawings and the specifications. And then you have the bidding and the construction part in which you help the owner supervise or observe the construction process, making sure that the contractor interprets the drawings correctly and does what he's supposed to do for that price.
So you have a big job then.
It's a very exciting responsibility.
My goodness, yes, that is a great responsibility, because one would think that once you deliver the blueprints, that's it.
No.
That's just the beginning.
And then even after you finish, even after you turn it over to the client, you're still legally responsible.
How is that?
Because of the law. There's a statute of limitations.
Oh.
And so for 7 years, you're responsible for that building.
7 years? Oh.
And then if the roof leaks, the owners always call you and say, George, you gave me a bad roof, and it's leaking.
Even though you didn't actually put it there,
That's right.
The roofer did.
Or the plumbing is not working, or the air conditioning is not working. And
But then do you have to go out and contract all these people? Or the contractor does that?
The contractor is responsible for a year, and there's some items that are on warranty.
Okay.
There's a real famous story about Frank Lloyd Wright, who everybody knows who Frank Lloyd Wright was. And one evening during a very elaborate dinner, one of his clients in the house that Frank Lloyd Wright had designed had a leak, and it was leaking right on top of him. He was so mad that he got on the phone and he called Frank Lloyd Wright. He said, well, what do you want me to do? And Wright said, well, I suggest that you move your chair. and then there's another famous architect, Le Corbusier, the French architect, a very famous architect. One day the client was taking him to this house, and he said, look what you did. And he pointed to a puddle of water, and there was this big puddle of water. He says, what do you think I ought to do? And so the architect said, I'll tell you what you should do. And he pulled out this piece of paper, and he started to fold this piece of paper very precisely and very deliberately. And he folded a little boat, and he put it in a puddle of water. And so those sound like they're very facetious stories, but it points out that the architect can only do so much.
Right.
And beyond that, he can only, hopefully, he can hope that that his client has a sense of humor.
I can see why you say that. What jobs did I want you to talk about? The good ones or the bad ones?
Yes.
But
well, I don't have too many bad ones. Hopefully.
Well, I'm glad of that. I wouldn't think so, because of the fact that I know of a couple of buildings that you mentioned that I've seen, and I think they're beautiful, and absolutely. And I'm sorry you didn't bring any of your blueprints with us at this time, but we, listen, we don't have much time, and I want to ask you a couple of questions right quick.
Yes.
And that is, you talked about some of the subjects that youngsters need to look at if they're interested in going into this kind of career. Which ones did you think that would be the most important ones?
There's one subject that I think that is absolutely imperative, and that is English.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I think that in order for a person to develop into a fine architect, he needs to have a very good sense of mastery of the language. Okay. And English is a vehicle for that. And by English, I mean not only rhetoric and composition, but also literature, poetry, drama. But if he needs to be able to read and write very, very well. And so that should be his #1 priority, better than drawing.
Mm-hmm. That's a fact. I never would have thought that. Mm-hmm. And then what would be your advice then to them who are looking at this kind of career to go into?
Well, I would think that
what they need to do.
That person develop a very well-rounded program in which he has a diversity of subjects. The sciences, the arts, the liberal arts. I think the liberal arts are very, very important. A lot of people tend to minimize the value of the liberal arts, and I think that's a mistake. I think the liberal arts are even more valuable than the sciences, because eventually it will be the liberal arts that will tone that person to have that keen sense of humanity, that keen sense of spiritualism, which is essential.
And that would be your advice?
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming by, George.
Thank you, Ada.
Sharing with us all of your wonderful experience. And I know that our students have really benefited by your being here. But we want to tell them, too, also that listening here to Mr. Villalava, okay, today has certainly been a wonderful experience for me. And I hope that you've received the same kind of experience that I have. But remember, it's not going to be easy. Whatever career you want to pursue, it's going to be hard work. But it's worth it, because it's your future. Thank you.